best-selling author as well, talking about, the things that actually we may take for granted as being truth may need to be turned upside down. And that's what Pam Killeen does so well. Wrote a book, co-wrote a book called The Great Bird Flu Hoax, and that was that bird flu that went through. When I read that book, boy, I'll tell you, I was like, oh my gosh, we got gassed on that one, pardon the pun. And then there's now this about this N1H1, and I asked her about it if she wanted to do a show tonight about that. She said no. She said, that's be too easy, because right now she wants to get people to think right, to be able to think right, because then eventually if your brain is working right, you'll be able to actually decipher what's going on out there. By the way, just before I introduce Pam Killeen, I talk about the insanity of it all. Not that I'm saying that people dying is not a big issue, because they do it every day, but the N1H1, on the news, the death toll was 4. The death toll is 4. I think we are in for one heck of a media hoodwinking on this one. But you know what? That's not what we're here for today. What we want to do today is talk about those of you that celebrate life, I guess, in a new way. And I mean that, I guess, when I talk about celebrating life is because what if you could actually start celebrating instead of feeling depressed? What if you didn't have maybe those moments when you're suffering from depression or maybe mental illness, but there's moments where you all of a sudden go, I think I'm over, and then all of a sudden you dip down, and then you're back into it. How about having that celebration all the time? My guest tonight says that you can, and you just have to learn how your brain was broken and how to fix it. Joining me now in the studio is Pam Killeen. Hi, Pam.
Hi, Garth. Thanks for having me on.
Well, good of you. All the way from London. Thank you for coming. I feel privileged because you drive over, and thanks for being a great guest over the years. You know what, Pam? This idea of people that have depressions, anxieties, mental illness, the World Health Organization, to your information that you led me to, I knew that depression and mental illness was going to be considered one of the #1 disabilities in North America, if it isn't almost already. But worldwide, it was going to be one of the leading contributors to health issues worldwide, right?
That's right. It's crippling society, and very few people are talking about it, and even fewer seem to have solutions for it. And so this is one of the main reasons why I'm doing this workshop that's coming up in London, and I wrote my next book, which is going to be out this fall. It's called Addiction, the Hidden Epidemic.
And so are addictions causing our brains not to work right?
Well, what's happening is we're starting off with brain starvation. We're not feeding our nervous system properly. And what we've seen over the last 100 years is a decline in our mental health. In fact, from 100 years ago, we're actually 100 times more likely to be depressed or, generally speaking, suffer with a mental disorder today. And so, even since the 1970s, we're twice or 3 times more likely to be mentally ill today. So we see this decline in our mental health, and it does seem to correspond with the decline in the quality of the food that we're eating. And this is a stone that psychotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists don't seem to be looking under. And I think that, frankly, they really have no choice but to start looking under this stone to look at the nutritional deficiencies that are going on in people who do have mental issues.
Well, I guess to conversely look at that is to say that if they actually had a handle on it, then why are prescriptions at an all-time high? Why are we have more people in disabled positions now? If their approach has been correct, then we should see it receding.
Exactly.
In fact, it's actually multiplying.
It's getting worse every year. So we've been using psychiatric drugs now for 30 or more years. We've seen an increase in psychotherapists and psychologists and so on. None of these modalities seem to be helping people. Like, as you say, the numbers are getting worse. So we have to start looking at other variables. And the variable I'm suggesting that we're ignoring is the variable of nutrition. And so my next book in my next book I have interviews with some experts who are not just psychotherapists, but psychiatrists, medical doctors, who are actually curing mental disorders using nutritional approaches.
Back in the 1970s, I remember my family, hypoglycemia was kind of first really became well known, at least in Winnipeg. Mayo Clinic first and in Rochester, and then they started to identify it there. And then there was a doctor in Winnipeg that my family went to, and they believed that they could cure hypoglycemia, what was called the megavitamin theory, which was lots of vitamins. That was a precursor to that health kick that we know today. Back then, they were certainly spotting the problem of nutrition as it related to blood sugars and addictions and things like this. But we've come a long ways. But I don't remember seeing people struggling as much as I see them today struggling.
Right. The problem is amplifying, there's no question. And megavitamin therapies, which were basically originated from people like Dr. Abram Hoffer, who's a Canadian psychiatrist, and his Orthomolecular Society, which is based out of Toronto. It's thanks to his work, really, that we've seen improvements in people who are struggling with everything from schizophrenia to depression to substance abuse. And so, you know, we do have answers. There are clinical experiences with using megavitamin therapies, but alongside the vitamins, of course, you have to have a sound diet. And that's, I think, a lot of what's missing where people are taking vitamins. They're not really getting the diet proper.
So, you know, people watching my show would probably think I need to be on medication myself, and I don't mean that because, you know, I bring on people that are vegans and vegetarians and people who say, you know, don't eat this and don't eat that. And of course, I think the role of being, what I've taken my role as a television host is to expose people to many ideas and for them to try and figure out what would be right. So you're just another one. I don't mean that in a negative way. You're coming with this piece of information. If you asked a vegan whether or not you know, eating meat was important to sustaining life, they would say that you know, you would be completely off your rocker. Now, having said that, you're a former vegan and you have something
I'm
to say
a recovering vegan. I mean, I got much, much sicker as a vegan, and I didn't understand the fundamental principles of diet when I was a vegan. That's going back 10 or more years ago now. But today, now we know the importance of eating animal protein, and so we have to look to success in order to recover from this problem that we have in society today.
So let's go. So let me take it back a bit, because I kind of jumped off the fact that you know, we're kind of jumping into this meat thing. Let's go back to what the history of diet. So the diet's changed hundreds of years ago. Mm-hmm. And from that point, according to what you were telling us, is that a hunter-gatherer to then all of a sudden agriculture, and there was a big demarcation in what happened to mankind.
Right. What happened is we reduced our consumption of nutrient-dense foods, and of course animal foods are far more nutrient-dense than animal foods.
Than vegetable foods.
Or, I'm sorry, vegetable or plant-based foods. Okay. So what happened was, as hunter-gatherers, where we're eating lots of meat and fish and so on and so forth, at the advent of agriculture 10,000 years ago, we started eating more things like wheat and oats and barley and things like that, and those foods are nowhere near as nutritious as the animal foods. So as we start shifting into agriculture, of course, this is where you start to see a decline in human health. And what's even exacerbated this situation is what's happened over the last 50 years, where we have, you know, amplified that situation even more, where we're replacing more plant-based foods again with animal foods. We've seen a huge reduction in our consumption of animal foods over the last 50 to 100 years. And as we've reduced our consumption of animal foods, we've seen an increase in mental instability.
You are not a big fan of low-fat anything.
Right, and we need the animal fats. I mean, humans are fat heads. So our
brain is,
we are fat heads. You
okay.
know, 60% of our brains is fat, and the majority of the fats in the brain actually are the long-chain fatty acids, which only come from animal foods, not plant foods. So this is one thing where vegetarians and vegans really don't understand the importance of eating the long-chain fatty acids, things like arachidonic acid and DHA. These are incredibly important fatty acids that we need for our cell membrane to function properly, and we are only as healthy as our cell membranes. And so if we're starving our cell membranes, we're going to have a lot of trouble with our health, not just physical but mental.
So this idea of how to fix a broken brain, I know of friends of mine that have, you know, have certain situations. I think everybody goes through a mental health moment. To me, it's not something. First of all, it's something that society we don't want to talk about. And Dan Carter, you know, has talked about it. He's been, you know, he talks about mental health issues and addictions. I mean, and he's spoken very clearly about, you know, the other host of the show. And the funny thing about this is that, but people sort of talk about processes they went through in order to beat it. Everybody goes through, I think, a bad mental health day or a bad mental health moment. You know, it's not right to be angry, but it's not also right to be manically happy either. It's somewhere in the middle. I have friends of mine that are, like I say, that have struggled with this. Mm-hmm. I think they'd be sitting here listening to this show today thinking, so you mean I don't eat right?
Mm-hmm. That's the majority of the problem right there. And when you look at the blood tests or urine analysis or hair analysis of people who are struggling with mental illness or addiction, you'll see a common thread, and you'll see problems in all those areas, whether it's blood sugar problems, thyroid, adrenal, certain nutritional deficiencies, all seem to be very common with anybody struggling with mental health issues. So this is why I'm so grateful to have interviewed and met so many clinicians who are successfully working in that area, helping people recover. And so I think, you know, when you see a consistent pattern, it's not, I'm not just talking about one or two clinicians here, I'm talking about several clinicians. Even those who don't even know each other are using very similar approaches or protocols in order to help people recover from everything from schizophrenia to addiction.
How does somebody, the idea